everybody. Thank you for joining us on episode number 55 of the FareCompare video podcast. My name is Rick Cini. I'm the co-founder and CEO of FareCompare.com.
And happy October, Rick. I'm Ann McDermott, and we are going to talk about all kinds of things. There's a ton of fall deals out there, but more importantly, we're starting to see some delays and cancellations, things like that. But we are also going to talk about Halloween.
No, I mean, Halloween's a big deal at my particular house. My wife actually had the decorations up more than a month ago. And I do have a bird nesting in the witch that's hanging off my front door, which scares the hell out of me every time I go out for a walk as it flies by my ear. So hopefully they'll have a nice little nest there, and we'll see some little birdies here in the near future. We'll also, on the podcast, take a question from a customer, and we'll also talk a little bit of what sort of a North Florida event in the Suwannee Halloween. We'll talk a little bit about that event as well. So as we jump into the podcast, let's talk about our first topic.
Well, and that is what to do if your flight is canceled or delayed. You know, to a certain extent, there's not a lot you can do, but there are some things you can do that'll make it easier and maybe even get you on the next flight out faster, which that's got to be your goal, right?
Yeah, so I think, so the first thing is that the last thing you want to do is find out you're the 20th person to realize that your flight's been delayed or canceled. So it's really important that you have alerts set up. Now, the airlines provide flight status alerts. There's some companies out there that also do Flight Stats, FlightAware. Several of them do provide you alerts to some degree, but that's about getting good quality information. Essentially, what you want to be is though you're the gate agent at the airport and have access to that type of information. So when you do get notification of delay or cancellation, then you can then go into what I like to call panic, get to a human as quickly as you can mode. That may be in line, may be on a phone. More recently, actually, you can do that on social media. Twitter's been a great place and has been being staffed up in many cases. So I think one of the most important things that you have to be able to do is, if you're doing this ahead of time. So let me just sort of walk what I did. And I just got back, by the way, Ann, from the Ryder Cup.
Wonderful.
And so I was I flew into Minneapolis this past weekend. Beautiful weather out there. US won, and my business partner is Scottish. So not only was he wearing a kilt, he had to actually bear the brunt of finally losing the cup. But we'll get back to that later in another podcast. But before the flight, the night before and the morning of, I actually went out to the Flight Stats website, checked out the airports. What was it looking like? I actually have an automated system on both Southwest and American. In this case, I flew American. Those are 90-some-odd% of all the flights out of the Dallas area to make sure I had flight status alerts. I think I got 2 or 3 status alerts. Everything went off without a hitch. But if I had gotten one of those alerts, and I also like looking at the country as well, around the country, to see if there's something happening in the Northeast, because sometimes that can delay things and trickle down all the way to flights during the day. You have to sort of act like a little bit of a weather forecaster by at least looking at a weather map when you get up in the morning on the day of your flight. I also like to check the reservation, make sure the flight times haven't changed. We've seen that in the past, Ann, with flight times changing. Sometimes their changes are only 4 or 5 minutes, but sometimes they can be, several minutes. Make sure the phone numbers and email addresses are on your record as well.
I flew a couple of weeks ago, and my flight was one leg of my flight was going to be late, so I got this email saying it's going to be half an hour late. Then I got a second email saying it's going to be more than an hour late. And if I had, thought, okay, I've got an hour, and just, put my phone away and turn off the sound or whatever, then I would have missed the third email I got that said, whoops, it's only 20 minutes late now. I mean, if at a certain point, you better be at the gate anyway, correct?
Yeah, you do. And getting on standby lists for different flights, sometimes it's good. Like if you're stuck in like let's take for example a hurricane. If you're in a place where a hurricane's bearing down on it, your best bet is to get out of that city no matter how you can. Now I've seen people get away by planes, trains, automobiles, but and a lot of times it's hard to get away because everybody's trying to head back early or and sort of miss out on the festivities of something crazy that's going on. And it's really important that you get away from the issue if you possibly can in those particular cases. Now, if your flight's been canceled, clearly you're going to get a refund. Now, by the way, Anne, when your flight's canceled, remember they took that money for your ticket in like 4 nanoseconds. But to get your money back, that's usually 2 credit card billing cycles. And as well, if they do delay your flight and put you on a flight the next day, you just can't say, well, okay, I'm just not taking that flight. You have to call and actually cancel that flight. You can actually cancel your flights if they're setting up new times to leave the next day or whatnot, and you decide you don't want to go on your trip.
You mentioned hurricanes just a moment ago. Let's talk Hurricane Matthew.
Yeah, no, I actually was, looking this morning. I did a bunch of radio shows this morning, and the track as of this morning was that it didn't look like it was going to make landfall, but it was going to put a significant amount of wind and rain on the south part of Florida, especially on the Miami, Fort Lauderdale side. And as well as potentially up the coastline, including places like Savannah. And if it actually does make a landfall, that might hit North Carolina and some of these other places. It could reach out for example, as far as Atlanta. If that was going to cause some issues at Atlanta airport, that would definitely cause all sorts of trickle down issues. At the moment, I'm looking sort of in real time, and I'm looking at the number of cancellations right now that actually have been done for today. Only about 15 to 20 cancellations in Miami and Fort Lauderdale ahead of the storm. A lot of those are Caribbean flights. And with American having the biggest hub down there in Miami, that's where we see some of the cancellations. But the airlines did announce this morning that through the 6th, and I get a feeling that they're going to actually extend that to the 7th and maybe even the 8th. They're waiving change fees if people want to change their plans right now. Now, I will note that airlines are very proactive. They have meteorologists on staff. They don't like to see people sitting at airports. It's not good for them on the news. It's not good for PR. And they do have in the past pre-canceled flights. Sometimes the weather actually hasn't hit, probably causing their own set of heartburn with revenue. But the airlines are pretty proactive about allowing you to change your flights or even pre-canceling flights. So you got to be aware of what's going on.
We do have a post on our site with several airlines, more than a dozen of them, and contact information to both their travel alerts and like phone numbers, how to get in touch with them. And I guess that's one thing. Anytime you take a flight, you should have the airline's phone number in your phone.
It's always a good number to have. I actually have even old phone numbers. When I had certain set of privileges, I keep those phone numbers on. Usually they won't kick you off the phone even if you don't have that status anymore on some airlines. So so getting a human is important. I will note that the kiosks are getting better. It's too bad that the phone apps haven't gotten any better, but I was able, for example, on the way back from the Ryder Cup to get on the standby list from a kiosk. And got back on an earlier flight than I was expected to, even though they said the flight was oversold. I actually got home a couple hours early. So use technology to your advantage.
I love your latest ABC column, which is a smart traveler's checklist. And it's a guide to avoid, disasters, problems like that. And your number one tip is my favorite, and that's always using parity.
I know I converted you. We've talked about this in the past. I had a carry-on. I got the last seat on the plane, but they did gate check my bag, and it took me 30 minutes to get my bag off the carousel. That's why I like to actually carry it on. In this case, I actually, because my other flight was 2 hours later, it was worth it. And but in this particular case, I was actually hailing an Uber, so I made sure the Uber didn't get hailed until my bag started to arrive. So, but yeah, carry-ons are really important. Save the $50, save the hassle and the time. New rules around carry-ons too. If the airline loses, in some case, well, some airlines, when you do have carry-ons, do charge, so be aware of that. Frontier and Spirit Airlines as well. So just make sure you're on top of that. And and one of the things that I think anybody should do, whether it's for business travel or for leisure travel as well, and it's pretty easy to do because a lot of receipts are done through email electronically, is to make sure you have all your receipts available to you.
Absolutely, because if, say, your bag goes missing or you need to file a complaint of any kind, they're going to ask you for all kinds of documentation and, bag tags, all kinds of receipts, boarding passes, on and on and on. Whatever you got, hang on to it. Just stick it in one pocket of your bag, and then when everything turns out right, as most of the time it does, then throw it away. But keep it all. Just don't toss it.
I would also note too, I know we've talked about TSA PreCheck a lot, and for people that probably watch this podcast, they probably travel more than the odd bit. A lot of people ran to the TSA PreCheck, $85 a year earlier this year when they looked like the lines are going to be 2 hours long.
I did.
So those people on TSA PreCheck do have a checklist. I know. I thought it was funny. My business partner and I were flying back from the Ryder Cup. He knew his shoes set off the metal detector, so he actually had to take off his shoes in the pre-check line. So probably not a great idea to wear the metal-toed shoes in particular in some of these cases. So I know there's a lot of women's shoes that have metal stuff in them. All it takes is once to be caught in pre-check and have to take your shoes off, and it sort of ruins the experience. And we've seen I remember when we even had one of the top TSA agents say he forgets and brings his bottle of water through and has to go back and ditch his water. That 3.4 ounce rule is out there as well. So, TSA PreCheck, in my opinion, is one of the best. If you're traveling more than a couple times a year, it's definitely one of the things you absolutely need to do. I particularly like the global entry version, which is only $15 more a year, and you also get on your international arrivals back from your particular international trip. You actually get to expedite through immigration and customs as well.
I can't speak for global entry, but I can say there is, for me anyway, there was an unanticipated benefit to doing pre-check, and that's my husband hasn't had time to sign up, but when we travel together, voila, he automatically gets pre-check. Now, maybe that's, coincidence, but I suspect it's something of, it just makes it easier for them, but he's been getting it. So
that's interesting. Yeah. So in theory, they're supposed to only be giving it to people that actually have paid for it. But I got a feeling they do that in order to sort of meter out the lines and make sure there's enough people going into the pre-check lines, which they want to keep open all the time. And I think the other thing too that I didn't do this time, but you know how you get that funny feeling that you left something at home?
Yes, I do.
And I do that actually in the morning. I'm like, okay, phone, glasses, keys, wallet. And those checklists are extremely important. I was going to the Ryder Cup. I was like, make sure you have your tickets. Really, I was like saying to myself, as long as I have a driver's license and my Ryder Cup tickets, I can always buy something when I get there. So whatever your checklist is, make sure you check it twice, and it won't be Christmas time while you're checking it twice.
Yeah, phone, wallet, keys, sunglasses, the things that you must have on your person. I know somebody that recently lost a wedding ring in a hotel room.
Oh, awesome. That's really great.
You should check your room carefully before you leave.
I did, and I do, and that's one thing I do. And I was heading back, like I said, and it was early in the morning. We had to get up around 5:45 to 6 o'clock. Those wake up calls are pretty tough sometimes. And I was just putting all my stuff together, and I went, oh gosh, I forgot I had 2 shirts hanging up in the closet because they weren't like readily accessible. Pull those down, toss them in the side of the bag, and run because we were getting a little bit late for the airport. So be sure and check every nook and cranny, electronics, cords, you name it.
It plugged in a socket and didn't glance down once you took your phone away. So don't miss that.
Yeah. So, and then, one of the other parts too is that if you are going to be eating, as you go through security, if you're bringing stuff through, make sure you knew that. Packs, snacks. If you do like we talked about in the previous bit about sort of knowing that you have possibility of being delayed and whatnot. And remember, if your flight's delayed, doesn't mean just because you got that note that you shouldn't head to the airport any later, to be honest, because they can actually undelay your flight. So pack snacks, be ready for things, especially if you're traveling with kids. Always a good idea to make sure you have as much of the bribery stuff that you can possibly have with kids as well if you're traveling.
Now, we've got a question from a customer, and this one is short and sweet. It's from Tyler in Jalisco, Mexico. And Tyler says, when airfares go down, does the decrease typically affect all classes of fares? Interesting.
Interesting question. Yeah. So I think there's sort of two ways to interpret the term classes of fares, right? So typically you have two broad sets of fares. You have leisure fares and business class fares. So let's assume that on any given flight you have about, let's say, 10 to 12 different price points, right? For domestic flights. That means essentially two people sitting right next to each other could be paying wildly different prices depending on how early they bought and when they bought and which of these quote unquote fare classes are out there. In general, for example, if they only had a limited number of the very cheapest booking class airfares. For example, Southwest today, as we're sitting here, announced a huge fare sale, which is being matched by airlines for wintertime travel. When those prices go away, that wouldn't affect, for example, the business class inventory too much. If a bunch of seats were completely sold on the plane, essentially what happens is that there's what's called a booking curve. And if bookings are better than expected, almost all the fares tend to change, or the prices you see with inventory and fares. So they actually tend to change to the higher, or they don't add much lower ones in there. On the flip side, when bookings are down, so it's kind of funny. I know people that are pros at this, they see, okay, well, there's 6 seats or whatever. There's only 6 seats left. Well, what happens is if all 6 seats of those are sold at that particular fare class, the airlines will dump in 6 more seats, depending on how well bookings are going down. So in general, the answer is leisure tickets tend to be more affected by purchases that occur that are leisure oriented, especially early on in the game. And business class or business type fares of business inventory don't seem to change that much. If you're paying $1,000 for your ticket, that price doesn't change a whole lot. If you're paying $150 for your ticket, that price might change pretty dramatically depending on what happens on a given day. I hope that answers the question.
So what about like first class, business class compared to coach or economy?
Yeah, so typically on a domestic flight, we'll just call it first class since there's usually only 2 cabins, economy and business, or what they call first sometimes. You would have basically 3 price points essentially for first class, and those don't tend to change a whole lot because a lot of those seats actually have high-end travelers, frequent flyers that are part of their awards programs and have achieved certain status on the airlines. A lot of those seats end up going to those people really in the last 3 or 4 days. So the price point doesn't tend to change dramatically on those particular ones for business class. Now, as far as economy class fares, it's all about sort of your advanced purchase. If you're buying 3 months out, for example, airfare inventory is going to come in and out, some of the cheaper stuff as they probe to see how well demand is. Remember, airlines have to take a pretty serious leap of faith in the history that they keep in order to hold back, let's say, 20 or 30 seats for business travelers who aren't going to buy until the last 7 days of travel, who they want to sell that ticket to for $1,000. So they have to be pretty fairly accurate on their forecasting in order to hold back some of those seats. And that's why buying at the last minute is really not a good idea.
Well, thank you, Tyler, for a fascinating question. And thank you, Rick, for a great answer.
I was trying not to get too into the weeds on those particular questions. But in general, when a certain set of seats sell, only a handful of those fare classes, if any, just that one fare class will actually change.
If anybody else has a question, please send it to customer.service@faircompare.com, and Rick will help you out.
Yes, and now we're off to another domestic Aventurous location. Remember, you can download the Aventurous app on the Google Play Store or on the App Store on the iPhone as well. So this week's event is a play on words with Hulaween. I guess it's Suwannee Hulaween outside of Jacksonville. Looks like a pretty interesting concert location with all sorts of acts and craziness going on.
We reported that it's something like $8 billion is spent, $8 billion in the U.S. alone. But Halloween, interestingly, has really spread around the world. So it's very cool. This particular event you're talking about is in Live Oak, Florida, and I believe the closest airport to that would be Jacksonville. And it sounds like a lot of fun. I mean,
yeah, it looks like a bunch of electronic music and some great photos, by the way, on the site. So don't forget to download the Aventurous app on the Google Play Store or the App Store on iOS, and check out some of those events. I know we added a few more this week. I check out almost all of them all the time, seeing if there's something fun place to go. It looks like a bunch of electronic music, and I think one of my favorite bands out there, actually we were just laughing about this earlier, the String Cheese Incident will be playing along with My Morning Jacket, Sean Lennon, John Lennon's son, for those of you that aren't as up on it, like I'm not as up on it. So check that out. And it looks like it just a huge party going on for a couple days, sort of leading up into Halloween.
It's got disc golf, canoe trips, yoga, sports lounges, and spectacular art. And also this I find very intriguing, 800 acres decorated with Halloween scenery, Halloween motifs. I mean, you know, how cool is that?
I've seen some of the pictures, and it looks like a Halloween version of Woodstock out there. So you'll have to check that out. And the light show is incredible. Some of the photos. So check those out on the Aventurous app. And also, you know, one of the things I would mention too, if you download that particular app, it will be updated. You'll see these things popping up, and you'll be able to get your alerts on those apps pretty soon. So don't forget to sign up for alerts to places like Jacksonville if that's where you're heading. And we'll make sure that you get a good deal flying in there and heading back home afterwards as well.
Thanks, Rick.